DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at the Hag's Hexes. No jokes, I don't want to get cursed. So, the Hag's Hexes, what are you getting in this 66-page supplement? You're getting quite a lot. You're getting a bestiary, which includes a bunch of hags, as you would expect, but you're also getting a number of other things, including one player option, the Changeling. More on that later. You also get Chapter 2, the bargains and the curses. Hags are known for their bargains, so it makes sense that they're explained in a little more detail here and how they work and operate. And also their curses, the things that they kind of inflict on those mortals foolish enough to cross them. Now, Chapter 3 contains a plethora of magical items, most of them cursed, but that doesn't stop an adventurous individual from picking them up, using them, and regretting it immediately afterwards. Finally, and you get Chapter 4, the tactics of the hags, and how to play them and kind of get the most out of them in an adventure. Now finally, Chapter 5, you're looking at an actual couple of encounters and 2 full adventures to kind of give you a good example of how these hags should be set up, run, and played to get the most out of them in terms of their nature and the abilities they possess. Because hags are tricky and sneaky, some dungeon masters find it difficult to kind of play that kind of character, and having an example of how they would actually run in a game is a really nice add. Chapter 1, the bestiary. You get a lot here. You get a number of hags, the Candy Hag, the Feathered Hag, the Hagling, the Noon Hag, the Sheltan, the Ice Hag. Now the Hagling isn't technically a full hag. It's kind of like what happens when a hag attempts to produce an offspring. They create this creature by consuming a human girl and then basically throw it back up again as a hagling. This hagling goes and seeks and tries and finds and kind of complete a set of rituals that will turn it into a full hag. Some are far more dangerous than others. For instance, the one to turn into a feathered hag requires it to dip itself in a pool of molten iron. Yeah, not a huge amount of things surviving that. But my favorite has to be the Candy Hag. The Candy Hag is a creature that evokes those images of Hansel and Gretel. That kind of creature that sits in a gingerbread house with a gingerbread man and making cookies and brownies. Now, if you've not figured it out by now, Hansel and Gretel ended with a tragedy. Well, Hansel and Gretel, in one version of the story, pushed the poor witch into her own oven, where she was trying to eat and fatten up. I think it was Hansel. However, in the Grimm fairy tales, I don't think that's what happens. I think, if I remember correctly, she consumes both of them. And that's what she does. She puts things into her soul oven, converts them into treats, and then eats them. Because that's what hags do. They're horrific. But they also have a number of other minions. The gingerbread warriors that I mentioned. Gingerbread thief. Sorry, not warrior. Different class. That go around stealing trinkets of unwary adventurers. You also have the Gumdrop Ooze, which I particularly like, which comes in multiple flavors. Chapter 2, Bargains and Curses. Now this is where the kind of scary parts of hags come into play. Hags love to make bargains, love to make deals and all kinds of things. And as part of that, they like to make the bargains one-sided. Or at least enough in their favor that they can get away with it. Or at least at the very, very least, unlikely that any mortal would ever complete their side of the bargain. There are a number of bargains here. The Dark Hunt, the Endless Fountain. My favorite is probably one of the older ones, the Promethean Pact. The Promethean Pact essentially says you must complete 3 tasks. If you complete these 3 tasks, the hag will provide you with some measure of ability. You can pull from any Fey ability that comes from a Fey power. So from simple things like dark vision, all the way up to things like being able to control plants. All of these are Fey abilities, and they kind of tie into nature very well. And I could see some devious DM putting kind of this in play and saying, here you go, you can do this as a druid, and then you would have access to so much more power than you did before. But if you don't complete it in a year and a day, you are the hags forevermore. The other one I really like is the sweetest deal, where the hag shows you your true love and demands only one thing, your firstborn daughter. And then, when it comes time to claiming your firstborn daughter, claims it, replaces it with her offspring, haggling, with a small birthmark over her heart, where the heart has presumably been consumed. And then, once the haggling reaches its 13th year, murders her parents in a bloody mess. Curses are simply attacks against a player of some kind, and some of them come from the magical items. However, a very large percentage of them come from consuming various bits of the gumdrop ooze. And at first they seem great, so I could see a hag potentially sitting there kind of providing these bits of ooze to a person. At first you'd get something like, oh, well, you've got the curse of the flame. Well, you're immune to fire now, but you're afraid of fire. All fire, even with your immunity. Rather interesting problem there. Never going into fire, always being afraid, and actually having the fear condition as part of that. And there are other ones as well. The curse of the thin is where you can run 3 times your normal land speed, but you must consume a loaf of bread every hour. And if you don't, you take damage. I like these curses. They're very, I've given you something, now I'm taking something more important to you. In fact, that's the kind of theme of a hag. The bargains and the curses are almost always invariably, I've given you something, and now I'm taking your soul, your eyes, or something else more important than that. Moving on to chapter 3, you have magical items. Now, if you've been following along, you probably surmise that most of these items are going to be cursed, or in some way detrimental, and you'd be right. The vast majority of them cause problems. Even the simple things that there's a magical spyglass that allows you to see into the Feywild, but the Feywild sees back into you. But there is a number of items that are benign in nature. For instance, there are 2 that I can name right now. Garflob's Axe, which was used to slay hags and various Fey evil creatures, and Grandmother Ursula's Scale, which allows you to cast Disguise Self, but you must always keep the scale visible. Everything else is kind of a mixture of curses, and there are a whole set of items around here to say, for instance, if you pick up the hammer, or the symbol of healing, you heal better. You heal 3d10 better for a period of time, until the curse begins to take effect, and you slowly lose the ability to heal at all. Rather, a lot of these things are like this. Axes of slicing, bows of piercing. They do more damage, and they're much more powerful than your normal mundane items, but they render you vulnerable to the damage type that they deal. Very interesting, don't you think? Chapter 4 is all about tactics. How does the hag play? How do you deal with this creature, this sneaky, conniving, evil creature? And this gives you good grounding for how to do that. It gives you things like vocalizations, quips, and things like that to say, here's how this hag behaves in these situations. It even kind of details how they would set up a deal and why they would do it in the first place, the situations that those can occur in. It also gives you things like how hags set up covens and how they build around that. So it's a really great resource for dungeon masters, and that's why I'm trying to avoid saying too much in this area for any players watching, because as players, we shouldn't know how the hag's tactics work. We shouldn't try and seek these creatures out in general. As players and characters in the worlds, most of the time the best advice your adventurers probably know is avoid hags at all costs and never seek their bargains, unless you're truly desperate. Finally, you have Chapter 5, Encounters and Adventures. And this includes a number of encounters along with 2 full adventures, one centered around a Candy Hag and another centered around a feathered hag. Both very good for doing what I think would have been kind of slightly lackluster, is giving you an example of how these hags should be run, an example of how they kind of fit into a world and fit into an adventure. Because otherwise, you've got the tactics, and you've got the bestiary, so you've got all the stat blocks, and you've got a couple of magical items to throw around every so often, but without actually seeing how these creatures play in a real adventure, it gets a little abstract for some DMs. And so having that example you can build off of, or even just take parts of, gives you a very good grounding to kind of incorporate these interesting, unique creatures in your game. So finally, what did I think about the overall content, the overall supplement? Overall, I think it's a great idea. It's like Volos, but for very specifically for hags. And you would have thought that would have been, 20, 25 pages at most, but they've given 66 pages out, and it doesn't feel padded in any way. It feels like every page is important and valuable. The magical items are all interesting and unique and don't take up too much time. And the lore behind all of the hags that they've introduced are really interesting. Like I said, my favorite is the Candy Hag, but I'm a sucker for a fairy tale. There are other ones in here that are also interesting, and if you've played The Witcher, you probably know the Noon Hag and the Ice Hag very well. They come up quite a lot, and very early on in The Witcher 3. In addition, the idea that having the tactics there, and then having the example adventure along with it, gives a lot of help to DMs who want to use hags, but are too afraid because they have very complicated story and background ideas. And I love the bargains and curses. They are beautifully presented and well structured, and they give you a good idea of where they can be introduced. In addition to that, there are adventure hooks peppered throughout to say how you would do this, why you wouldn't be introduced to these kinds of hags or creatures. And the player option of playing a changeling. That's a really interesting idea, something that I've not seen kind of done before, kind of a product of dark magics, but maybe trying to, make the world brighter because he's a product of dark magics could be a potential. Or maybe make it dark enough so it matches him or her. Anyways, my final rating is going to be 5 out of 5. I really like this. If you want the supplement for hags, if you want to run hags in all of their flavors, this is the supplement for you. Pick this up now. Thank you. Please do remember to use my affiliate links for anything you purchase on the DM's Guild. If you purchase the Hags and Hexes, that definitely, and you should do so, that will help me out. It helps me purchase more content in the DM's Guild, it helps me kind of pull things in, and it helps the channel out. Please also do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Peace out.